In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. Okay, so you have one of these in front of you. You should, in the slot in front of you. I want you to open to page 42. Crack the spine, right? Hasn't been opened. All right, so page 42 is the reading that we just read. So if you see there, it's the first time we hear about the people following Christ. They're hungry, but they don't say anything about that, if you notice that in the story. They don't say that they're hungry, but then the disciples say to him, send them away because it's late, and this is a deserted place. The deserted place, the word deserted is actually, could be, in Greek it's edimos, which is the desert. So it was not only a lonely place, it was the desert where they were. Send them away to go so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves, right? And Jesus says, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. Okay? Keep that in mind for a second, and then we're going to flip the page to page 45. Now you see there, on verse 32, it says, and now Jesus called his disciples to himself. This is page 45, verse 32 on the left side. I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued to be with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on their way. Then his disciples said to him, this is a different story now, by the way, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7, and a few little fish. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks, broke it, gave it to them, to his disciples, and the disciples gave it to the multitude. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets full of fragments that were left. In the story we heard today, they took up 12 baskets, right? So this is a completely different story. Now those who ate were 4,000 men besides women and children. The first story was 5,000, right? Now, if you look just a little bit further down on that right side, so 16, verse 5. Now when his disciples had come to the other side, so they finished feeding, they go to the other side. They had forgotten to take bread. So here we go again with food. So you flip the page, and it says, Jesus said to them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Beware of the leaven. Everybody knows leaven is like yeast, right? It makes bread rise. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have taken no bread. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves, because you have brought no bread? Do you not, do you not understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Nor of the 7 loaves and the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? And then it says, then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of the bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So there's 3 things there that kind of tie together. And we hear the story about the feeding in the wilderness, but I think sometimes we might lose the fact that there's actually 2 different feedings that happen. And then this is brought to closure. Christ himself speaks of the 2 times that it happened. Now, a couple things with the stories is the first time it happens, he says, you give them something to eat. So he commands them to give the food to the people who are needy. Now, he knows what they have, but they don't even know what they have, which is very interesting. St. John Chrysostom writes about it, and he says that the disciples were just following Christ, and they didn't really have an idea of how much they had with them. So they went and they looked through their bags, and they found out how much food they had, and they brought it to him, and it was the bread and the fish, and it wasn't even enough to feed them, which is the other thing. So they had enough bread and fish for maybe a couple people, but not 12 by any means, and not 70 who were the other ones that were following Christ as well, plus the 5,000 total. But he tells them, you bring your things here and you feed them. And they say, well, we don't have enough. So Christ takes that, he looks up to heaven, he blesses it, multiplies it, and they have plenty to eat. Now, one of the reasons he says, you bring it and you feed them, is to really show the disciples that they have enough. Even in their meagerness, even in not enough, they have enough. Now you might be saying, what am I talking about? Christ himself knew that if they offered those things to God, they offer them in prayer, they offer them in giving to God, that those gifts were going to be multiplied, that they would be enough to feed everybody. But they didn't understand that. They didn't understand that they had to do their part. And the other thing, too, is Christ asked them to do their part. Christ could have easily said, they don't have anything to eat, and pray, and food appears, and everyone is fed. Or he tells them, go fishing and put the net in, and you'll catch enough fish for everybody, or whatever. Or there's going to be a deer running down the way, or a herd of animals, and they will all fall dead at your feet, and you can eat them. He didn't do that. He said, bring what you have, and it's enough. And they look at him and say, how can we possibly do this? How can we feed them with what we have? But with God, they had plenty. In fact, they had too much. There was leftovers. But God, and Christ looks up to heaven to show that he is one with God. He takes their gifts, he multiplies them, and says, now go feed them. And they distribute it. And then they collect the baskets up afterwards. So they were serving the people. They took their meager gifts, they offered it to Christ. It became multiplied. They served the people with the multiplied gifts. Then they take the leftovers back, and it's plenty. The same thing the second time. Except Christ doesn't ask them, you go feed them this time. They knew the drill, right? They knew what happened last time. So what happens this time is they just go. They bring, this is what we have. So they knew that Christ could do this. They knew that he could take their gifts and multiply them. And then in the end, Christ says, beware of the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So beware of what their teachings are. And they said, did he say this because we didn't bring bread again? And we didn't have enough? And how's this work? And they're so, at times when there's a lot of people and any reference to food, they immediately took it to be physical food. But the important thing here that I want to take out of you to take from these stories is that there's two feedings. The first one, he says, you feed them. The second one, they offer freely to Christ. They don't ask questions. They don't say, how is this going to be done? But they offer to Christ freely. Now, in our lives, we have certain gifts that we have. Certain gifts that God has given us specific to us. And you might be saying, well, how is that specific to us? Well, some of you are great in math. Some of you are great singers. Some of you are great speakers, or you read voraciously, or whatever the case is. You have certain talents and certain gifts. But it's all different. But is it enough? And we always say that, no, it's not enough, right? You ask somebody how much they need, and what do they say, right? A little bit more. How much would you like to make it work? A little bit more. How big would you like your house? A little bit bigger. How would you like your car? A little bit newer. How much gas mileage would you like to get out of your car? A little bit more, right? It's always a little bit something more, always. But when we look at our gifts, especially our talents, we might say, oh, if I was only a little bit better at this, I would be able to change my life or the lives of those around us. The key to this teaching that Christ gives us is that in our lack of things that we have, there can be a fulfillment. But that fulfillment comes when we offer those things to God. The first time the disciples when they brought the fish, they're like, okay, here you go. Kind of like, I don't know what you're going to do with this. And then it's multiplied and they take it back. The second time, they didn't dare ask that. They just brought. They offered freely and they knew that it would happen. The lesson for us is that when we initially are leery of giving, we're leery of giving of our time, our talents, our treasures, our love, our kindness, all those things in ourselves that we might say, it's just not enough. Or I can only do so much for this person, or I can only say so much, or whatever, that the first time you might be leery about it. But Christ takes it and he multiplies that. He multiplies the gifts that we offer to him to give to others. And that's the key to this too. It's not for the disciples only. We receive the benefits from what we give to others. So the disciples were fed because they fed the 5,000. They weren't fed because of themselves. They said, we need to send these people away to get something to eat. They didn't say, we need something to eat, even though they didn't have enough food for themselves. They said, Lord, it's late, there's nothing out here. They need to go, otherwise they're going to get sick. But they weren't concerned about themselves. But in feeding others, they fed themselves to abundance, to plenty. So the same thing is when we offer our gifts to God for others. Many times in the church we talk about giving, right? It's always giving, and the priest is always the first one that's, the dart is thrown at anytime I say give money, give time, give talent, give your life to God. It's always, oh, here he goes again. And that's not what this sermon is about. It's not about me, getting you to separate from your wallet. This is about you looking at your entire inventory of life and saying, what can I offer to God for others? And in that, the blessing is that he takes it, he multiplies it for that person, and we also receive the benefit. And then the second part of that is, when we do that once, when we do it one time, we learn from God how he can multiply things, how he can take our incomplete nature and make it complete. He can take what is lacking and fulfill it. And that's the prayer, actually, of ordination. For those who were here for Father Panagiotis' ordination, the prayer says, Lord, as he's kneeling down, Lord, fulfill that which is lacking and make fill that which is missing. That's what we ask in our lives too. So as we look at this reading, to try and remember that we have to offer to God everything. And in offering everything, we receive even more back. And it's kind of, it's against our mindset. We wouldn't think that, right? You don't think that offering, if you give something to somebody that you're out, really? That's kind of what it is, right? You give, if somebody says, hey, can I borrow, $50,000, as if we all had that sitting around, right? $50,000, you say, sure, you can have it. Then we would be out that money. But when God calls us to help others and to offer things to others to fulfill them, whatever we give him is multiplied and it's given back to us in abundance. Now, the best way to start with that is not going around and looking at your checkbook and seeing what you can give, but look at your life and the time you spend talking to God, to ask him to guide you. In our brokenness, in our missing fulfillment of our lives, to ask God to say, here's what I have. Teach me what I should do with it. And just offering it to God. In fact, the disciples offered their bread and their fish to Christ, not knowing even what he was going to do with it. Right? He said, bring it here to me. But they didn't know how many fish he was going to make. They didn't know how much bread he was going to make. They didn't know what he was going to do. It was just, here it is. And I think that's our first approach in prayer, that we have to start in our relationship with God, is to say, here I am, God, what do I need to do? And then the key is to be quiet to listen and to be open in our hearts to hear where God is guiding us. Because many times, we talk. I mean, you talk to somebody who's got a big problem, what do? It's like they pull the chain, they pull it again, they keep talking like those dolls that had the string on the front, right? Or it was actually on the back, but for my intents and purposes, it's in the front. But they keep going. The key to listening to God answering your prayers is you got to stop talking so you can hear it. So offering ourselves to God begins with saying, this is my brokenness. This is what I do have. Teach me to do what you want me to do with it. And it all starts from little incremental steps, from the little nothing. Now the 5 fish, right? The 5 fish that were, or the 5 loaves that were there, that doesn't, if everybody had something out of the disciples, there would have been 12 total, right? Or there would have been actually 82 with the other, the 70 disciples who were following too. There would have been 82 items. But it wasn't. Some people don't have much of anything. But even in the little grain, as Christ says, even in the little grain of mustard seed, that we can do extraordinary things. So today, in this reading that you hear, think about your lives. Think about what you do well. And everybody's got something. But offer that to God. And say, this is what I do, but I don't know what to do with it specifically. And just submit yourself to offering those things to God. And He will take it and guide you. But you have to be quiet, you have to be prayerful, you have to be open, and you have to be vulnerable too. There's no one who gives something to someone that doesn't give a little vulnerability, right? If you want to share your life story with somebody, think of that, right? Sit down, and if you were to sit down with your kids and tell them all the mistakes you made as when you were growing up, think of that. You'd be like, man, this is really putting me on the spot here. This is a really vulnerable time. But I'm not saying to do that. But I'm saying that anytime we offer something that is personal, anytime we offer something that is part of us, it opens us up. And it makes us vulnerable, it makes us giving. And then when we do that to God, when we become vulnerable to the Lord, is when He takes it and He takes everything and He says, okay, thank you, now watch what I can do. Amen.